right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the most ambitious crossover in sports podcasting history. This is the live preview show brought to you by Pharma Soccer and Speedway Soccer. I am Valair Shabilla, and joining me today are two colleagues from Broadway Sports Media. First, we have Nashville's best export since the Pedal Tavern. Ben, how are you, man?
I'm not sure how to take that, but I'm doing well. I'm excited. This should be fun. It's the first time in like months, so ready to get back.
Yeah, look at us over here. Video, audio, we got it all covered. Next up, we have who some are calling the hottest soccer writer in the Knoxville area. Chris, how are you, man?
Good, Valair. As Ben said, it's good to be back in the saddle after a seemingly long break over these last couple months.
Yeah, but Nashville SC is back in action, and as you can see, we are back in action. Let's get right into it because I think we're a day away. We're a day removed from the game. We're actually 24 hours exactly, and some change depending on kickoff time from game time. And I think a lot of fans seem a little on edge. I would say a little less optimistic than things have been. Maybe since the Leagues Cup have been kind of taking a hit in terms of morale for this market and this team. But before we get into this game two, I do want to take it back to game one. A game one where Nashville struggled, not necessarily creating, but finishing those chances. And honestly, without the sort of wonder goal from Cartagena, Orlando didn't look anything unbeatable. So if we can start just with Ben on the thoughts on that game and how everything went down.
Yeah, it's a weird one because, I mean, on one hand, I think they were the second best team in that game pretty clearly. I think Orlando dominated basically every metric that we have and deserved to win. But that said, I mean, Nashville created the two best chances in the game, and Orlando won on you have to call it like a world-class strike that no goalkeeper in the world is probably saving. So, I mean, while Nashville didn't, I don't think, deserve to win it, they also weren't that far off. And so I get just the general vibe around the team has been low for pretty much since they finished the Leagues Cup. And I think that's understandable. I don't necessarily think that this game is one to be as down on as at least from what I've seen. I think the fans have been pretty down on it.
Yeah, I think that's the frustrating part for a lot of Nashville folks, or at least what I've seen, is that Nashville are in these games enough to where everybody thinks they have a chance, but for some reason it's just not coming off. And I think that makes it almost a little more frustrating than, just completely losing out. But Nashville have been in every single game, since pretty much the franchise has existed, except maybe one or two outliers, like the Atlanta game that we saw earlier this season. But overall, Nashville are always in the game, which is a really good thing, but at the same time could be frustrating. So, yeah, Chris, I was just gonna throw it back to you. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would have played out quite a bit like Gary Smith was intending. They had those two brilliant chances with Surridge and the Teal Bunbury header that went wide. They were forcing a lot of Orlando's shots from outside the box, even if there were probably a little bit more than they would have intended. And to your point, yeah, I mean, Nashville's always in games. And when you are the 7th seed and you're having to go on the road potentially twice in order to advance, that's really what you can ask for, all you can ask for in those road games, unless, you're supporting Kansas City. But if you can keep that game close, if you can, rewind it and say that Surridge buries that one chance, it's a totally different ball game. Then Nashville can sit back and invite a little bit more pressure and then can go on the break and potentially even steal a second. So game plan wise, I think it worked out kind of how they were thinking. It just, the execution was lacking.
So looking at the approach from Gary Smith and Oscar Pareja, from the home game that they had, it played very closely, right, between both of these teams, and it was a tight match, probably honestly the tightest one we've seen in this first round of the playoffs all around the league. most matches have been won by 2 goals or so, and a lot of those matches had a clear winner, like SKC, even though they were playing away from home. But the home team has been, except for that one series of St. Louis and SKC, the home team has been the winner in 90% of these playoffs. So how much of a factor does that come in when we're kind of getting ready for this game at Geodis Park?
I mean, I think it's a factor. I think the issue is that Orlando is the best team in the road in MLS, and we just saw them come to Nashville and get a win. So yeah, I mean, home field advantage is huge. I think more so in MLS than really any league around the world, at least any kind of top 10 league. But it's Orlando, and I feel like that changes things. I also think that this is, I mean, Gary Smith has talked really since they came to MLS, but especially since opening Geodis Park, just kind of some of the struggles that they've had. When you're at home, you're the team that has to dictate. Visiting teams kind of sit back a little bit and let you have the ball more. That's never been Nashville's strength. And I think there's a good chance that with getting the win in the first leg, I think Orlando could kind of take that up a level and be like, you know what, the pressure's on you, Nashville. You can have the ball. We're content to defend and kind of even, make Nashville more uncomfortable, because Nashville are not comfortable with the ball. And that's been an issue that we've seen with this team for 4 years. Even at home, they're best when they can sit low, let the other team have the ball and hit on the counter. And I think Orlando and Oscar Pereira might be a little bit too smart to let them do that tomorrow. And I think especially since they're coming into this they're coming into this with a huge advantage. And so I'm really interested to see that kind of tactical matchup, how Gary Smith approaches that. And yeah, if Nashville even have, I mean, not even the capability, but like the personnel to play that style that they're going to have to.
And we'll get into Nashville and both Orlando and Nashville here in a minute. But, the way that these playoffs have been going, it seems like we have seen some exciting matches. And it seemed like for the neutral, the Orlando-Nashville match probably wasn't the most exciting. But I wouldn't put it past, this rivalry, if you want to call it that, to produce something exciting. Now, the exciting thing might not be goals. It might be just red cards or something like that, based on what we have seen from the coaches and the managers. But before we get to all that excitement, Ben, you were talking to Gary earlier today and to Dax McCarty. What's Nashville's availability like? And if you have Orlando's as well, what we're looking at in terms of player availability?
I mean, I don't think it's anything new for either team. Dax talked to the media, which is usually a pretty good sign that whoever speaks is going to be involved. I mean, obviously he didn't play in the first round, carrying a bit of an ankle knock. From everything Gary said after the game, he should be involved. And I think the fact that he spoke to media today kind of seals it. Randall Leal is the only questionable player on the injury report. I think he probably ends up on the bench. If he's anywhere close to being healthy, you'd think that Nashville put him on the bench in a must-win game. And then, that's it for Nashville. I think for Orlando, it's the same. It's the same as we saw last time. I think it's Jacqueline out and Fabian, I'm blanking on his last name, also out. Neither of whom have been like massive players for them. So I think both teams are pretty much fully healthy coming into this one.
Yeah, so I mean, it's shaping up to be another battle, because every time these two teams plays each other. Now, Nashville won in Orlando earlier this year, just as a reminder, 2-0. Orlando came to Nashville last month, won 1-0. Then, of course, there's the playoffs game. Nashville lost 1-0 in Orlando just 8 days ago, because this schedule makes no sense. So, with that being said, again, I think this is shaping up to be another chapter in this rivalry, and not just from this year, guys. I talked about it on Twitter maybe last week about how long just this rivalry goes back to, and I keep calling it a rivalry because I truly think it is, even though people kind of shy away from that word. But I really think it is, because Nashville's played Orlando more than any other team in any other league in any other situation. They've played them the most. They have had playoff matches. They've already had knockout matches away from the playoffs in the U.S. Open Cup. And there's been some late goals, some drama, some red cards, and coaches talking not so nicely about the other coaches. So like there's everything you need, and fans clearly don't like each other. If you've plugged into Twitter the last few days, well, the last couple of weeks maybe, you've seen some stuff maybe you never thought you'd see on the Twitter front lines, I guess. So we'll leave it at that for now. But Chris, I want to take it back to you, because I think there's a question in everybody's mind, and it's the biggest question here, I think, is just what does Nashville have to do in this must-win game to ensure that they can get a result at home?
I think the big thing is score first. If the longer this game goes on without Nashville having a goal, that pressure is going to mount. And the big advantage that Orlando carries into this game is that they don't have to win. They know that in their back pocket that if they do lose in Nashville, they can go back to home where they've been excellent and get a win and advance that way. And more so with Nashville too. I mean, it's like what we've talked about, that, you know, they struggle to create chances through the run of play when it's not on a counterattack. When the deeper a team drops on them defensively, the tougher it can be. So the later in the game it goes, and if Orlando's still holding to, you know, a 0-0 draw or a 1-1 draw or something like that, the pressure is going to ratchet up on Nashville quite a bit. So I think just to establish themselves, get some confidence, especially with as poor as the goal scoring form has been of late, getting an early goal, I think, is going to be key for Nashville in this one.
Ben, anything else from your end?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. And I think the best games that Nashville play, especially at home, are when they take an early lead and the other team has to come out more, and it leaves Nashville more space on the counter. And I think we saw this in Orlando, whenever the game was. Gosh, it feels like forever ago. Crazy MLS formatting. But I mean, as Nashville gets further and further into a game, chasing a goal more and more, I think that, I mean, it just gets farther and farther away from their strengths as a team. So yeah, I think an early goal is absolutely crucial tomorrow night.
Yeah, and I think honestly, it's just one of those things where you can almost tell from the start if Nashville is going to be able to sort of control the game a little bit. And I don't mean that just in terms of possession. I mean that in terms of maybe a mental strength. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but what we have seen from Nashville players recently is some agitation that, whether it's warranted or not, is besides the point. Yes, there might be refereeing decisions that don't go your way. Yes, the other team might be doing some dark arts or whatever you want to call them, right? And it's like, eventually what you have to do is control yourself and control your own actions. And I think that's the sort of sensibility that we all expected from Nashville coming into this season and coming into every season they've had in MLS, to be fair, because they are that team. They are the oldest squad in MLS for a reason. They have players like Dax McCarty, like Walker Zimmerman, players who have played in World Cup, players who have played for their national teams. And I think keeping their heads is the other important thing. And I think they did well with that actually in Orlando until about the end, where we saw Hani Mukhtar get really frustrated. And look, these are professional athletes. I don't think they should be, you know, they should be not on edge or not emotional when playing. Of course, you want them to be emotional, but I think there's a level to where that could maybe make the team a less just not as strong as it could be. And we saw that early on in Orlando between Sean Davis and Shaq Moore a little bit with the back and forth. But overall, I think they're going to have to be a little more conversational with each other rather than maybe blaming each other. And I think the most important thing is just keeping your head and making sure you are fighting for the team and not fighting against the team. And that's one thing that we've kind of seen Nashville struggle with. Now, I do want to take it back to the history between those two teams because of that point specifically, because these players know about each other. Dax McCarty and Gary Smith both brought this up with you, Ben, and the presser earlier. With these teams being so familiar with each other, we'll start with Ben, but Chris, I want you to answer this as well. I mean, what advantages and disadvantages does this give you facing a team essentially 3 times in a matter of what, 4 months now? I mean, 4 weeks now. Like, does that help? Does that do the opposite of help, whatever that is? Because I can't think of the word.
That's a good question, and I'm not sure. I have the greatest answer for it. I think the downside is that you get super familiar with each other, and it's harder and harder to throw any curveballs, especially just tactically. Um, I don't think at this point there are a ton of surprises that either team can throw out there. I think they both have a pretty set identity, and everyone knows kind of who they are and what they are. I think maybe one of the pluses is that if, say, in the first leg, Nashville's players are on the field thinking, you know what, we need to try this. They don't have to wait until it's not like a regular season game where you have to wait a couple months and actually try to implement it against a team that's in a completely different spot. You can turn around and implement it pretty quickly. But yeah, I don't think it's a huge advantage or disadvantage either way. I think it's just a weird scheduling quirk, and I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. I think we kind of just to quote Tim Sullivan, I think we kind of need a bigger sample size before we can really figure out how it's actually impacting things.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there is any advantage, it may be a slight one to Orlando for no other reason than they came to Nashville recently and got a win. So that's going to give them confidence knowing that, hey, we've done this, we've done it recently, we can do it again. And then two, I think, and I'd actually have to go back and look at this, but just feelings wise here, the more you probably face a very cohesive defensive unit like Nashville, the more you have chances to kind of test those attacking patterns that you're going to use to break them down. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is like the bigger sample size Orlando has in their attack, I think it's going to only help them a little bit more. Whereas Nashville, it's a lot more, hey, get vertical quickly, score on counterattacks, set pieces, that sort of thing. I don't think that is as big of an advantage as it is with those more intricate movements that require, hey, you've got to get steps 1, 2, 3, 4 right in order to score a goal. So if there's any advantage, it's Orlando. I don't think it's that big. And I think it's going to be a pretty even match regardless, as the rest of them have been between these two clubs throughout their history.
Yeah, when you look at the last 2 matches, one at Geodis Park, one at Exploria Stadium, 1-0, both of them 1-0 to Orlando, but very, very fine margins. Gary Smith will, to this day, until today, he brought it up again, that that goal shouldn't have stood at Geodis Park. I've never seen that man hate something more than that goal. He's just bringing it up every chance he gets. So, which makes sense.
I think he hates turf fields more than he hates that goal, but it's
that
a
is
close
true.
second.
He does bring that up, to be fair, often. But I think he has a point. I think it's at best a questionable decision, but I don't think it was an easy decision at all. I think there were some decisions in that game that made it even worse. The goal in itself, I don't think was even the most controversial decision from that game. But anyway, back to my point, which is both of these games have been very tight. It's gonna be more of the same. We're not gonna see probably either of these teams go out and win 3-0 or 4-0 or anything like that, unless something goes catastrophically wrong. So then I guess the question becomes, who are the game changers and who are the most important players out there? And to me, when it comes to Nashville, there's one big name that just seems like Nashville just can't figure it out without, and that is Dax McCarty. Every time he's on the field, Nashville plays differently. There is a rhythm, there's a flow to the game that he brings you. Ben, just how important is Dax McCarty to this Nashville SC team?
I think I said this before. I would say he's the most important player on the team besides Hani Mukhtar, in terms of impacting how Nashville play and how effective they are, like with and without him. I would have said Walker Zimmerman a while ago, and I think this season we've seen other guys step up, Jack Mayer, Lucas McNaughton, and I think really cover for him in ways that we haven't seen before. No one does that for Hani. I don't. And to be fair, I don't think there are many MLS teams that can play without a player of Hani's caliber, and not suffer. But also, I mean, no one can cover for Dax, and that's been a huge issue. I mean, I think Dax is a fantastic player. He's I mean, last year was a down year for him. The start of this year was a down year for him. I mean, I remember that. I think the Cincinnati game, he just whiffed on a header in midfield, and led to a chance. Was subbed off within a couple minutes, and he was, I mean, visibly upset on the bench. I mean, I think he said later actually that he thought about retiring after that game. So really, I think we've kind of forgotten how much he was struggling at the start of the year, and then he just flipped a switch, and he's been, I would say, one of their 2 or 3 best players in the second half of the year. Definitely one of the most important players to how they play. There's no one else in the team who can even come close to the type of progressive passing that he does. Anibal Godoy does it at times just way too slowly. He telegraphs his passes a lot of times before he actually hits them, whereas Dax takes 1 or 2 touches, gets the ball into space quickly. And I think in a lot of ways that's been a huge part of why Hani Mukhtar has been Hani Mukhtar over the past couple of years, because he has a guy like Dax who's able to kind of facilitate those transitions, and get him the ball in space quickly. And more so this year than any other year yet in Nashville's history, when Dax isn't playing, the entire team drops off. So I think having him back, especially at home, especially in a game that you're probably going to be asked to use the ball more, it's massive. And I think I mean, maybe even more than Hani, I think he needs to have a really impactful game for Nashville to advance.
And Chris, just going off of that, with Dax, with Hani, with a most likely sold out Geodis Park crowd, what is Nashville's approach to this game? What do they have to do in order to maybe get a result here?
I mean, I think you've got to goad Orlando into possessing the ball, bringing up their lines, and pushing them higher, so you can create that space in and behind. As Ben was saying, if Dax is on there, he's our best ball progressor, and they struggle without anybody else. But the one, key for Nashville has always been is having that space to progress it into. They're not usually ones that are great at progressing it through, carries or intricate play that, kind of moves it further and further upfield. It's usually quick strikes, getting vertical really quickly. So the more you can get those fullbacks kind of Orlando to chase forward, and create space for especially like a Schaffelberg or Pico, that's going to be, I think, tactically one of the keys there. Now, to Orlando's credit, I think they've been better about being more disciplined at those spots this year as compared to years past. I think the last few years they would always bomb those guys forward and then leave themselves a little bit more exposed. And I think one of the big keys of why they've been so good this year is they have shown a little bit more, discipline at those spots. But if Nashville can kind of get them to, come out of their shell and play a soccer game here, then I think that's going to create the space that Nashville needs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think another point that Nashville just cannot afford to do, and I don't know if this is an approach issue, it's more of probably a must-have for Nashville, is they just can't afford to have bad finishing again. They're with a team that is limited in chances. I mean, I'm not like saying anything that's rocket science here, guys. Like they cannot afford to not finish those chances again. And knowing the quality of somebody like Sam Surridge, and even someone like Teal Bunbury, who's been around this league for a long time, I don't think they are under any sort of impression that this is just another game. I think this must win, this sort of win or go home situation plays to Nashville's advantage a little bit better. And if they were to have one more game in the playoffs or many more games in the playoffs, they're all going to be this exact format, which is win or go home. And for them, it would be go home because Nashville is very unlikely to host another playoffs match. So I think there's a bit of maybe disconnect between how the fans are feeling and how the feeling is in the locker room. But, in terms of what you've seen from them this far, Ben, do you think this Nashville squad has what it takes to turn it around?
Yeah, because they were pretty awful in MLS before they went on that Leagues Cup run. I think we were all pretty down on the team heading into Leagues Cup, and they flipped a switch. And I mean, not even at the start of the Leagues Cup, they struggled a bit against Colorado, and then they lost to Toluca. I mean, so it's not like they weren't firing out on all cylinders for the entire thing. Really, they didn't start their best form until the knockout rounds. Maybe it's like they play their best when they have to type thing. But yeah, I mean, we've been saying for 4 years that this seems like a team that's built for tournaments. I think Leagues Cup was kind of maybe a little bit of proof of concept of that. And I mean, it as much as they've struggled, they still have all the pieces. They're still elite defense. I mean, at their worst, they're still elite defensively, and they're losing games by 1, maybe 2 goals. And that's maybe the worst Nashville has been in 4 years, or at least the most pessimistic and kind of the worst vibes around the team that we've seen in 4 years. They're still losing games by 1 goal. They're still competitive. They're still getting chances. So it's not. I mean, I don't think this is where anybody wanted them to be heading into the playoffs, and definitely not how they wanted the playoff run to start. But I mean, we've seen them turn it on its head before, and I don't think they're that far off from it. I mean, there's not a huge step between losing 1-0 at Orlando and advancing from this, because I think they did a lot of things right in Orlando, and I don't think it's going to take that much work for them to get from where they are now to turn into a pretty good team. I don't think they're that far off.
Yeah, and I heard Dax today say, we watched the film, we saw the film, and we saw that we were very close in both of those games, and they ended 1-0 because of a certain decision or certain mistake, whether it's from a teammate or the referee, but they were in the game. So with that in mind, Chris, I know you're still holding it down there in the stands every game almost, and cheering on. So I guess here's my question to you: is the perception, how far is this perception from the reality that is in the locker room for this Nashville SC team? Because everything we hear from Gary Smith, everything we see from the players, it's full confidence, full belief. They can do this. We're not far off. But it seems like everything I see from the fans is not that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of normal for sports and sports fandom, is that it's a lot bigger of a roller coaster ride in how you react to wins and losses than I think teams and players take it. Obviously, they take it harder in a loss, but they're generally more confident in themselves and keep more even keel about their future chances than what we as supporters would on Twitter or your social media platform of choice for the day. But they should have a lot of confidence, even despite how poorly the last 2-3 months have gone in terms of results. This is still the same team that in Leagues Cup beat Monterrey, beat Club America, went toe to toe with an informed Messi, and it took 11 rounds of penalty shoots to get knocked out. And this is a team that can go and stand toe to toe with the best that North America has to offer. So why shouldn't they have confidence? And as far as last week, you put one of those chances away and it's a totally different ball game. So they need to create more chances, but when they do have those chances, and they created a couple, just putting one away and executing is all that they need to really to beat Orlando in this one, and then potentially steal one more on the road.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it is something that within Nashville's capability to turn things around here. It's just we are so far removed from that Nashville that I think we are starting to forget a little bit that is a possibility. But just like Ben said, I mean, even their game against Cincinnati was kind of in the Leagues Cup was kind of like hold them off, just get to the penalties. And then we saw them go on an absolute tear right after that for 4 games where goals were flowing, really. So, I think we've kind of discussed everything about Nashville, and I know both of you have written pieces about Nashville SC and everything. But before we move to Orlando, Ben, you got something else cooking here for Nashville?
Yeah, I mean, just one other thing. I mean, I think I don't want to downplay the pessimism either, because I think a lot of it is valid. And I know I said that I don't think Nashville's that far off from being a really good team. I mean, and I think that that's true in the context of this season. Like, if they get fully healthy, if they start firing on all cylinders, they could easily make a run in the playoffs. They could make it to MLS Cup, whatever. Crazier things have happened. They still have a lot of work to do in the offseason. And I think they still have a lot of holes in this roster. I think they've waited a year or even 2 years too long to address some of these issues. So I think there needs to be a pretty big overhaul in the winter window. So I'm not trying to dismiss any of those concerns, because I think a lot of what fans are feeling is completely legitimate, and I think there is some frustration at how this roster has been approached from just a roster building perspective and from like a maximizing potential perspective. I think there's a really good argument to be made that you have Hani Mukhtar just dropping maybe the one of the best three-year runs that we've ever seen from any player in MLS. And I think a lot of fans are justifiably like wondering, what if we had seen Nashville kind of load up a little bit more in the attack earlier, if they had hit on some of these signings, if they had given him more weapons. And yeah, I think this winter is going to be a big one for Nashville. They're not going to get many more years of this level of production from Mukhtar and Zimmerman at the same time. So yeah, I think they could go on a run, and I also think a lot of what fans are feeling right now is very much justified. And I just
for sure. And
I didn't want to dismiss that.
No, for sure. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, fans have the right to feel however they feel about their team. I think there is a measured way to talk about this, where you can respect the 4-year, one of the best expansion teams, right, to come through a league. At the same time, look at the shortcomings and say that's just not good enough. Waiting a crazy, it's the first 6 months of the seasons or so before you buy a right back, then repeating the same mistake before you buy a striker the season right after. That is a frustrating way to deal with things. So I don't want to dismiss that either. However, this show would take a complete turn if we start opening those books, because it will never probably end. So, I wasn't trying to open that can of worms, but that's a great off-season show. So let's keep it in the books there. Maybe we'll get back.
We might have to do more than one podcast every 6 months to cover that.
Yeah. I'll have to bring you guys out of your little slump there to get you back on this. But let's talk about Orlando a little bit. This is a team that frustrates many players, coaches, and fans. Justifiably
one coach
so.
in particular.
One coach in particular, who I happen to cover. But I think they know, Orlando knows who they are, and they are very proud and happy of who they are. And all due respect, I mean, that's fine. If that is your identity, if that is who you are, own it. I think that is a very okay thing to do in soccer. And we've seen coaches and maybe personalities within the soccer world that kind of own that, and it adds a little spice to it. I'm fine with it. But I do have a question, for starting with Chris, and then we'll go to Ben on it. And Ben, you posted something on Twitter or X the other day, and it says since May 1st, the only the second best team in the league is Orlando, other than Cincinnati, since May 1st. And that's a pretty big statement as is. Are Orlando actually as good as their record shows?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously, yes, from the standpoint of it's a results-oriented business and they're the ones getting results. However, I would say that it's just as much about a couple of the other, I would say, more loaded teams not having the best of regular seasons. I think Philadelphia's kind of coasted through. I think LAFC kind of coasted through. For at least those two squads, it's kind of MLS Cup or bust for them. I don't get the sense that they're all that concerned with, chasing supporter shields or anything like that. It's the other competitions that they had their minds focused on. But Orlando's still a really good team. You don't finish, second overall and not be a quality team with, playmakers and a really good defense. Honestly, one of the better goalkeepers in the league. So yeah, they have their strengths. In some other years, did they finish that high? Probably not, but kudos to them for getting the wins and draws necessary to get up that high.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Chris. Maybe a little bit of overperformance, but I don't think anything we haven't seen from other teams around the league. They've been elite on the road, 31 points from 17 road games, which is just kind of ridiculous to think about. I mean, since May, they've actually won the most points in all of MLS, even more than Cincinnati. They just happen to play an extra game. So on points per game, Cincinnati's at 2, Orlando's right behind them at 1.96. So I mean, they've been up there with the Supporter Shield winners for 2/3 of the season. And I think it's pretty remarkable too. Just if you look at their roster spend, they're the second lowest team in MLS. I think, if I don't have that wrong, maybe the lowest.
I think they were the lowest.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so they've gotten a ton of production. They've hit on a lot of U22 slots, something that we've talked about with Nashville. I mean, but Cesar Araujo is one of the best defensive midfielders in MLS. They did a great job getting him. They've done a great job scouting players out of the draft. I mean, just the list of forwards that they have brought from the super draft turned into not just competent, but double digit goal scorers who were in the golden boot conversation at times. I mean, Duncan McGuire is legit. Daryl DK was legit. Kyle Aaron was legit. They got all of those guys from college. And so I think you're seeing, I mean, it's one of the things that we talk about, why MLS is great, is because there's not just one way to do it. And so I think they haven't gone full Philadelphia. They're not producing a ton of players from their academy. But they're getting similar production from similar spend and just doing it in a completely different way. So I really like what they've done. As far as how they play on the field, I don't think they don't necessarily have anybody who's absolutely elite, nailed on best 11 type players. But I think every position has at least one above average level player in MLS. Most positions, they have 2 guys who can come in and not give any drop off. I think Pereira is a really good kind of facilitator. He's not maybe an elite number 10, but he runs things really well for them. And then defensively, they're really solid. So yeah, I think it's really hard to look at them and find any major weaknesses at all. I think they're just a really well-rounded team, and they get production from every position on the field.
Well, boy, did you steal my question already, because I need you to find at least minor weaknesses, but maybe if not major ones, because to me, I hear you and I see what you're saying, and I hear it and I understand. I see the record, I see the goals, see Duncan McGuire, big dunk walking in, ending Michael Bradley's career in the funniest way possible. I see it all. I see it. I understand it. But to me, when I watch this Orlando team, at least for the couple times that they played Nashville SC, they seem very beatable. And just from the eye test, I'm not even looking at any stats or anything. So what are areas that they lack in, and are those areas something Nashville SC can exploit? We'll start with Chris and then head to Ben as well.
Yeah, I think it's the other side of the coin from what Ben's point was. So they're a team of really good depth and really good players across the board. What they don't have is that take the game by the scruff of the neck, absolutely can get you a goal in the playoffs, just elite attacking talent. I mean, that's what we've always seen from MLS, is that in order to go win a title, that's generally what you have to have, is at least one of those players. And Orlando doesn't have it. I mean, Duncan McGuire may be developing into one of those strikers, and he's certainly shown very well for his rookie season out of college this year. But he's still not in that class of elite finishers or elite playmakers that can make the difference in a playoff game. So I would say that's the one thing, is that it's a very good team across the board, but they're missing that one just alpha dog guy who's going to win you a ball game.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly where I was going to go. I think you could make an argument that, like, while Orlando may be a better overall team, Nashville will have the two best players on the field in Hani Mukhtar and Walker Zimmerman. And so, yeah, like Chris said, I think in MLS we've seen a bunch of times. It's not even about how good the team is. It's about if your best players step up when they need you to. Hani hasn't really done that for the last half of the season, but I mean, he was inches away from getting one of the goals of the season, and Galese just tipped it onto the crossbar. I mean, that's the type of moment that you expect from a guy like Hani. He was inches away from doing it. We've seen Walker Zimmerman do it on set pieces all the time. So I think, yeah, if Nashville's best players step up, even just sporadically, they get a couple moments and they take them. I mean, I think that can be the difference for Nashville.
Yeah, and I agree with both of you. And I think the other piece of that is having Orlando lose control or give them the perception that they have lost control of the game. Because a lot of these games, they keep them tight, even though they're winning, but they have full control on it. I mean, we saw it at the 1-0 in Orlando. Other than that one chance after the goal, Nashville didn't really look like they were in control. They were more frantic. They were trying to go for it. They looked desperate, to where Orlando seemed like they always believed themselves had that control. So to give them the perception or actually have them lose control, I think that would be a very, very good way to start that. And obviously, I think that goes back to the very first point that Chris made, which is the early goal, because that's the easiest way to kind of throw all the plans out. I don't know what metaphor or whatever I was going for, but to get their plans all mixed up, I guess, because, you know, an early goal is something that Orlando is not expecting and definitely haven't been really conceding a whole lot this MLS season. So I guess with that in mind, going back to Nashville a little bit, we talked about their weaknesses, and I guess we talked a little bit about their strengths, but for Nashville specifically, how do they target those weaknesses that Orlando have? What exactly, whether it's tactical or technical or personnel change, that absolutely has to happen for them to kind of exploit those weaknesses for Orlando. We'll start with Ben and then Chris as well, if you want to jump in.
I mean, it was interesting earlier today when we were talking to Gary and his kind of pre-match availability. He said that Nashville might not be able to win the game in the first 15 minutes, but they can certainly lose it, which was a little bit interesting to me. You typically want to see them go out and go for it in the first 15 minutes and really kind of stamp their authority on the game. And it almost sounded like he was kind of cautioning away from that a little bit. So definitely interested to see how they approach that. I honestly don't. I think you want to see them create more chances than they did in the first leg, but I don't think they need to do a ton more than they did. If they create one chance like that, you expect them to finish it. I mean, they created two chances that I think you expect to see them score from pretty much any other night. I think if they can create two chances of that level, they should finish them and they should be okay. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think, like I said, I don't think they're that far off, and I don't think they need to completely like rewrite how they plan on approaching this game. I just think they need to execute better than we saw last Monday.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one change that they can make is get Dax McCarty on the field. I don't think they need to do all that much, but getting him on there alone is going to help create a few more chances. It's going to help release the ball into runners in behind, and that alone should help Nashville take advantage of opportunities that present themselves.
Yeah, and I think with that we're kind of approaching the end here. We'll make sure to get the guys' predictions. Don't worry, because I love going back and just seeing how wrong we all are. But before we get to there, I think one thing to keep in mind, this is going to be Geodis Park's first ever playoffs game. Now, the Leagues Cup in a lot of ways felt like the playoffs, of course, but this is going to be MLS playoff match at Geodis Park, and that's something that Dax McCarty and Gary Smith both talked about the atmosphere at Geodis Park and just how much these players and Gary Smith rave about the atmosphere there. And I think for the Nashville fans, they have to give it their absolute everything. go out there and these are Gary's words, these are, you know, Dax's words essentially, and these are my words as well, is that go out there and just, you know, give them that best atmosphere you had. That atmosphere in the final against Inter Miami was probably one of the coolest things I've ever experienced with anything related to any sport. And you know, and I've seen my own team play at home and in terms of the Premier League and the NFL and the NHL and so on and so forth. So that's a really cool thing that I think Nashville has, that is controlled by the fans. You know, that is controlled by you, if you're listening. You know, that is something you can control, because a lot of things, you know, whether it's media or fans, we cannot control. So I think you go out there and maybe boo a little bit harder, maybe whatever, maybe cheer a little harder, and maybe they'll just make that difference in terms of the play on the field. But guys, do you have any other thoughts about the game or the atmosphere or anything at all?
I mean, I'm interested to see how it looks. It's I think the latest kickoff that we've seen all season at Geodis Park on a Tuesday night. So that's kind of a bummer. But also it's going to be, I mean, ridiculous weather for November. I don't think if people show up to the game, I think it should be a good time. And yeah, I mean, we've seen, even when the stadium might not be completely full, the atmosphere is still solid. It's still loud. I mean, there have been U.S. Open Cup games where it's 12,000 people and it still feels really loud, just the way the building is. So yeah, I think it'll be a good atmosphere. It's a must-win game. It'll be the last time they play at Geodis Park this season, unless they make it to MLS Cup and play either Sporting Kansas City or Dallas. So I mean, it's pretty small chances that you'll get another game until February, March of next year. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, show up, let the kids stay out late one night. It's not going to kill them.
That is data-approved comment from Ben right there. Your kids are allowed to stay up late. But no, I mean,
put my kids to bed way early so I could do this podcast, Chris.
No, as you said, I mean, this is going to be most likely the last game of the year, so you've got nothing to save your vocal cords for. So go out there, support them. Obviously, it's a bummer that it's a Tuesday night and a school night and that sort of thing. But the weather's going to be great. No other Nashville home matches until February with CONCACAF Champions Cup. So go out there and have a blast.
Yeah. And you know what? In February, if you are feeling nice and you want to go south the border, maybe Nashville will get some draw down in, I don't know, Mexico, maybe Costa Rica, maybe something nice like that. And then you can fly there and enjoy it. But until then,
are there any teams who have qualified from Belize or anything like that?
Guyana.
Oh, there you go. That's
a
team name. Yeah. What is that about? You want to talk about it more?
It's a country.
Oh, well, yeah. There's a team called Robin Hood. I said the out of Guyana, but no, there was a team called Robin Hood that qualified this last week.
We got to get Slate to come back and help us preview with his World of CONCACAF podcast.
Yeah,
there you go.
I know he was excited.
For tonight. But guys, I think we're nearing the end here. You know, I think we covered everything that needs to be covered for tomorrow's match, and we need to get this out so folks have a chance to listen to it. Maybe they're listening to it on their way to Geodis, you know, on their bus ride, or very rarely a bus ride, probably a car ride. But you know, we'll
don't start talking about public transit in Nashville. It'll depress people.
Yes. Yeah, let me. I'm just trying to taper the you know, the expectations, but let's get right into it. I don't only want you to give me your prediction. I want you to give me your prediction and any changes you would do to the lineup other than Dax McCarty, because I think we all agree that he should be starting if he's healthy. Do you make any other changes? What's your prediction? And go ahead and give me a plug while you're at it as well.
I guess I'll go first. I'm predicting 2-0 Nashville. The only other change I would make, I think you put in Fafa Pico instead of Jacob Schaffelberg. We've seen him play really, really well against Orlando in the past. I think he kind of has that edge that you're going to need against Orlando. I think he can. Gary Smith calls it the dark arts, and I think Fafa is probably the best Nashville have at that. And I think you need a guy like him on the field in an elimination game. And I think Schaffelberg is much better off the bench in a type of game like this. Follow me on Threads, Ben Wright Soccer. I'm trying to move away from Twitter, but it probably will never happen. And then check out BroadwaySportsMedia.com.
Yeah, so I don't think I would make any changes. I keep Schaffelberg on there just because I think that's Nashville's opportunity to score earlier on the earlier side is getting in behind. And what I fear most is if you start with Fafa and then have the plan of bringing Schaffelberg off the bench and you're the one chasing a goal, there's not going to be that space for Schaffelberg to run in behind. And so even though Schaffelberg has tended to do better and have a bigger impact coming off the bench, I think this year, I think I'd keep him as the starter. So my only change is Dax McCarty. Unfortunately, I think my prediction right now is 1-1 with Orlando winning on PKs. This whole last two, I mean, we talk about that the team is really close, that they were really close the other day. They need to finish their chances, but this is still a team that for the last 2.5 months has really struggled to put the ball in the back of the net. And the longer this game goes where they're not the ones in the lead, the pressure is going to mount on them. It's win or go home time for them. And Orlando doesn't face that same thing right now. I think that's amplified even more if this gets into penalty kicks. Now, Nashville did well in Leagues Cup in those situations and won a few PK shootouts and then battled with Miami to get to 11 rounds. But it's a different sort of pressure when they've got all of it on their side and less so on Orlando. Hopefully they prove me wrong. I want to see the season continue, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. As far as plugs, you can find me, Chris Ivey 865 at Twitter. You can find me at Threads, Blue Sky, any other social media platform that tries to take over. And then Broadway Sports Media, I'll have, of course, a article after the match and then already teeing up stuff for whenever the season ends for some off-season content of looking at the roster and where Nashville may be headed this winter.
There you go. Thank you, guys. For me, add Valair Shabilla on Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads. What's the other one? I don't know. Instagram. Yeah, whatever. Don't add me on Facebook. That's for like my aunt. That's it. But other than that, I as I predicted earlier this week, last week, I think I'm gonna keep my prediction of 2-1 Orlando win with 1-1 scoreline and Nashville pushing really hard and Orlando getting a goal there. In terms of the lineup, I probably agree with Ben to get in Fafa Pico and Dax McCarty. Otherwise, yeah, find me on all those social media at Valair Shabilla and Broadway Sports. We got all stuff covered for you. And then, of course, Pharma Soccer will have a fresh episode for you this week like we have been doing every week for the last 4 years or so. So make sure to tune into all of those and stay up with us on all socials. Thank you so much for listening to this. If you have been listening live, we really appreciate it. If you commented, we really appreciate it. And if you are listening to this on the podcast, we also really appreciate you. Make sure to stay up and support local soccer coverage. And guys, we're one more game to go, and we'll see if there's going to be more or not. So until then, cheers and goodbye.
never go full shepherd.
No.